Stephen's work is as a sociologist in critical gerontology, and he's had a very influential career. He has published many articles, many reviews and book chapters on topics which range from pharmaceutical enhancements in aging to mild cognitive impairment. He published Cultural Aging, Essays on Life Course, Lifestyle, and Senior Worlds, which has just, I think, appeared in a new edition in 2019, and recently released an edited book, Aging in Everyday Life, Materialities and Embodiments. That was in 2018. So Stephen is the co-founder of the Trent Center for Aging and Society. It's a very important institution there. His work was honored in 2009 with the Trent University Distinguished Research Award. And further, his career was recognized at Trent by the establishment of the Stephen Katz Distinguished Visiting Scholar in Interdisciplinary Aging Studies. So today, let's welcome this sociologist extraordinaire to Senior College. And the title of Stephen's talk today is Tracked and Fit, FitBits, Brain Games, and the Quantified Aging Body.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. I'm going to start my screen sharing. I'm just wondering about the view. It's kind of boxy. I'm trying to get all of you to the right of my screen so I can see the screen, but okay, this should do. Maybe let's make it right. Okay, well, good afternoon. Can everyone see the screen fully? Great, there's just the title. It's just a test screen. Thank you, Michael, for that very generous introduction. And as principal of Senior College, and Linda, thank you as co-chair of the program committee for inviting me to speak about some of the new technologies and expectations around aging today. Senior College also seems like a wonderful organization and a way to keep intellectually and socially engaged during our pandemic times. I really should inquire about fellowship myself as a newly retired faculty. Maybe I could talk to you, Linda and Michael, about that. And then, as Michael said, I'll talk for a bit, a Fitbit, and then we'll have a break. And I really look forward to your questions and comments afterward. I want to start by saying that the talk today is based on a couple of projects I'm involved in at Trent University with my colleague, Professor Barbara Marshall, who I also thank here for allowing me to share some of her ideas. These are funded projects. One's called Digital Culture and Quantified Aging, a SSHRC funded project. Another one that's just winding down is called Aging Communication and Technologies, or ACT, which is a SSHRC partnership grant that's based at Concordia University in Montreal. A third is called Being Connected at Home, Making Use of Digital Devices in Later Life, which is an international consortium with 4 countries collaborating: the Netherlands, Spain, Sweden, and Canada. I keep mixing up the title of that and calling it Home Alone, but I get in trouble for that. And then I'd also like to thank our research team, including postdoctoral fellows and research assistants. To start with, I think you're probably aware that gerontology is going through a kind of phase, which has been called the gerontological, the technological turn. The flagship of this turn is a journal called Geron Technology. Some of you may have seen it before. It first appeared in 2001. And the journal and the organization it represents, called the International Society for Geron Technology, that was established in 1997, were themselves inspired by the first book on the subject of Geron technology by a Dutch team, Bouma and Grafsman, in 1992. It's an interesting journal. If you care to look at some of the articles, it sort of does represent the latest research in the area. And there's been a whole slate of new books on aging and technology that focuses on a similar set of problems. One is the so-called digital divide between young and old. We just heard a comment from one of you about being kind of past it or something like that in terms of handling Roger's security obstacles. There's issues of personal and family private data privacy, about the circulation of personal data. There's issues about whether the promise of technology really does respond to new issues for older people of isolation, disconnection, inactivity, loneliness. We keep seeing this in the press, that with more technology, we'll address isolation and we'll address disconnection. Here's a sample of some of the current books and literature. There's even more, but you could see from the titles the kinds of problematizations that are being arranged around the relationship between aging and technology, to the point, whereas one of the books shows there's even the idea of a digital life course, that as you age, different technological inputs and stages become actually part of the design of your life from birth to death. The other book on digital technologies and generational identity is interesting, that different generations have different technological, let's say, space holders in their life course and identities thereof. So it is a kind of interesting turn, an interesting explosion of scholarship, popular culture, governmental interest, funding priorities, and really a kind of public sense that technology might just be the answer. Of course, with answers come problems. If technology is the solution, what is the problem? Who are the problems? And several problems that have emerged. One is what has been referred to as an interventionist logic, whereby age tech designers think of older people only in terms of their so-called problems: frailty, disability, decline, isolation. That is, this is what the technology is meant to address. So it kind of scripts older people into those stereotypes as part of the technical design, without much understanding of older users themselves, or how they negotiate their own technological relationships, how they customize technologies in their own environments, or how gender or class or ability may impact how technologies are used. Even the word user to refer to an older person is almost like they're at the terminal end of the technology, not the priority and not the agent, but the end result of the technology. Intervention is also a strong component of emerging reports. Again, how technology can lead to benefits, not only for older people, but for government care policy, because there's a lot of cost cutting that can result from telecare and robotics and technological intervention. There's a market too, an elder care market that's talked about in a moment, that's really booming. Now, there are many imaginative and inclusive researchers and designers. Many of them have had long careers of research on aging, like Dr. Jeff Fernie at the Toronto Rehab, who really have worked very, very hard to provide older people with sensible, affordable, negotiable technologies. And I'm not necessarily talking about them because they're not really in the majority, I'm afraid to say. And my concern is really with those who approach aging as a kind of marketing opportunity as well. So a couple of questions have emerged from our research. First of all, are questions of measurement. Are new digital technologies that measure and track and survey and monitor, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with several, if not all of these, perhaps in your own reading or family experience, in the name of promoting fitness by visualizing bodily and cognitive functions like sleep, that's a big one, mood, also creating new kinds of health standards based on technical measurements. And are these standards in turn creating new meanings of the aging process itself as knowable and manageable, as predictable, as connectable? And if so, should we be looking perhaps more closely at the validity of these measures? When you look at your Fitbit and it says 10,000 steps, what does that really mean to you? What does that really mean as a health standard? Maybe we should look at their origins, what's behind these measurements, what's behind their circulation, and think about how they become new values of truth for successful aging. And what about AI learning technologies? What are they actually learning about aging? A lot of our lives as we age are being tracked by AI through Facebook, of course, social media, through what we buy, through advertisements. What are they learning about us as aging individuals? How are they predicting our lives? What kinds of standards and expectations are being produced for us? And there's a kind of ARP diagram that I thought was interesting, showing about the inputs into an older person's life, you know, this model. And when, you know, what's possible, smart houses, exercise clothes, streaming lenses, video games, domestic robots, and the idea that this could be the successful ager of the future if they have the expected inputs, technical inputs and measurements coming out at the same time. Here's another image of the aging landscape and how there's you and your body in the middle, and how different technologies around you create the success of your life, your activities, your measurements, your mood scanning, and how that is health and wellness in terms of evidence through monitoring. The second question has to do with questions of economy. What are the current and future effects of the capitalization of health? How have technologies such as monitoring or tracking systems become a data economy of their own, of its own? Today, there's a massive investment in health technologies by the tech giants, Amazon, Google, and Apple, Microsoft, IBM, Uber, Facebook. Uber is thinking of an ambulance system, by the way, a private ambulance system. If you can't wait for the ambulance to come, you Uber an ambulance, including Uber. They've already experimented with Uber helicopter ambulances already. Facebook, of course, are all targeting now medical, pharmaceutical, health, and wellness fields, and they're absorbing hundreds, literally hundreds of new patents and products and startups. In the United States, the healthcare market is estimated to be worth $2.8 trillion, with Google's Alphabet's Google and Verily becoming actually corporate powerhouses in digitizing, commercializing, and transforming the health data economy itself. And it's just growing bigger and bigger. This is a massive economy when you think about it, and it's mostly about health data. Here's just an image of that from a company called Vivametrics that collects health data. And Vivametrics, there's a quote from them saying, wearable activity monitors produce more biometric data than the combined public health surveys of every nation on the planet. Think about how much data that is and how much data is part of their economy. The third question has to do with questions of discourse. I visited the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas in 2019. Crazy place. I don't know if any of you have been there. There's about 9,000 tech companies that over a period of 5 days show what is about to come to our stores, the latest and greatest and flashiest technological dazzling devices. And it's an amazing place, but I went to look at what was happening with devices and technologies for older people. And what's interesting I found is the technological discourse, the languages of fit and smart and enhanced and optimized that give all of these devices new excitement, new meaning. They are a new vocabulary to situate actually the successful ager. And my question and my team is, have such discourses created new images of the aging body as themselves open to calculation, control, prediction, and experimentation? We use this language a lot, and I'll have in my examples later what smartness may actually mean when it comes to older people, what living a smart life actually involves. The fourth question has to do with the technological future and the relationship between it appearing to be obviously a very optimistic and inviting and glowing one. But does everyone actually belong to that future? Who gets marginalized by it? What are the new barriers and divisions that translate successful aging into new striations of status? But now that status is based on technological accessibility, literacy, adaptation, affordability. Many new personal health technologies, as you might know, come with subscription-based apps. You have to pay monthly to have your data uploaded or interpreted, while others involve forms of inclusion that rank users according to categories of competence and conformity. David Beer, who's written a wonderful book called Metric Power, writes in that book that metrics are a form of power because they facilitate differentiation. They enable the production of winners and losers. So who is winning and who's losing? Who's in and who's out? Who's going to be part of the dazzling new future? Who is going to have no future or left out of the future? Further, there's growing evidence that technology-driven work and overwork in the care industry disproportionately lands on poorly paid and poorly trained immigrant female care workers who inhabit the underside of the technological turn. They are the labor, like the people running around in Disneyland with Mickey Mouse heads that you never see, are actually the cheap labor that makes Disneyland possible. And my last question, the ones we ask at our conclusions, is questions of what's been called reflexive longevity. If digital and quantifying age technologies are about improved physical, emotional, and cognitive health, then how do they impact on the reflexive conditions of longevity? That is the technological turn obligating people to renegotiate their experiences of aging and manage their futures and educate themselves in new but often burdensome ways against the risks and expectations of older age. I think this term reflexive longevity came from the work of Geron Kaufman, who's an anthropologist at the University of San Francisco, California. Has written a wonderful book called Ordinary Medicine, where she did an ethnography following around doctors and patients in long-term care and in hospitals, and noticed that increasingly older residents and older patients are being challenged by ethical questions later and later in life. Should you have a valve transplant at 90? Should you have invasive surgeries at 95? And what she calls a negotiation over time left, trying to understand how much time is left, how much technology do I want in my life to extend what kind of time. And so it's created this kind of ethical moment where one has to reflect on one's longevity, one's chances, one's time left, one's sense of obligation to live or to be around your family. And it's interesting the role of technology in that period of reflexive longevity. What can technology do to extend your life? How long should you extend your life? And what is expected of you in terms of accepting that technology? Often without any talk of what happens after the procedure what life will be like, quality of life, after at 95 or later, and you do get a heart valve transplant, or you do get an organ transplant, or a knee, or I'm not saying people shouldn't. I'm just saying it's a moment of thinking that is new in the 21st century. People died a lot sooner in the past, and now that we have longer and longer lives, technology has moved in and created certain ethical questions. It's also a great new book by Palladino called Biopolitics and the Philosophy of Death that talks about the same thing, the moving of the markers between life and death, and the role of technology in moving them, or at least making them negotiable. The fact that we can negotiate time of death is really also a 20th and 21st century novelty compared to the past. Let me go on then with a couple of examples that our research has been interested in, and one is in FitBits. Let me just see where that is. Yes. We chose these two examples, that is self-tracking Fitbits, and next example will be digital memory games and exercises. They're very different, but we think they're linked because they both track fitness standards that have consequences for defining aging, defining also older health literate people in quantifiable ways. Some of you may have Fitbits. I don't know if you do. I've tried them. They're pretty cool. They kind of grow on you, literally. You're kind of start looking at them more and more. You're wondering if you've had enough steps that day as you're sitting there. They do encourage you to get up, at least, I think, and walk around. They make us a little competitive with each other sometimes, too. But they certainly are an incredibly lucrative industry, wearable tracking technologies. And they are supported by public health initiatives that promote activity, promote exercise as kind of panaceas for successful aging. Insurance companies are also getting interested in clients who have Fitbits, and maybe even giving them a little bit of a break on their life insurance, or having you include such things in your applications for life insurance. Older people already are expected, as all of us are, to measure weight, to monitor blood pressure, maybe cholesterol levels, and other indicators of age-related health management. But what's new here is the extent for which the data accumulation permitted by these devices, along with the connective technologies, that is the Fitbit to your steps, to your computer, to your doctor, to your insurance company, to your friends, the way in which the connective technologies, which pool together and share and make visible such data, is new. Obviously, when you step on the scale tells you something, you get off, and that's that, a one-way communication. But this isn't just a one-way communication. This is a flow of data and information across various registers. On the slide are some of the ways that the data is represented and presented to you. You can have it as a chart. You could have it as steps. You can have it as translated into calories, how many minutes, how many kilometers, how many steps you climb. Really very appealing, I think, and very, very kind of interesting of how it reflects you back to you, what it is saying about your body, and what you can share with others. The most common data that wearable fitness trackers produce is steps. I think steps have become the symbolic value produced by trackers, and the goal of 10,000 steps per day, it has been cemented almost to a fitness standard. Even my doctor I talked to her a little while ago says, well, are you getting 10,000 steps in a day? And I said, I really don't have any bloody idea, but I'll, of course I'm going to try. I don't, and I'm immediately on my calculator. How many rounds at the gym represent how many steps, translates into how many kilometers and how many calories can be burned with, where 10,000 steps comes from, nobody knows. I've heard various stories. One is it emerged from the Japanese, the Olympics in Japan some years ago as a training recommendation. Some others say it comes from Scandinavia. I don't know. Maybe some of you know. Researchers in kinesiology and preventative medicine who use trackers as interventions with at-risk older people treat daily steps as a proxy measure of successful activity. And there's even new benchmarks around something called active minutes, not just minutes, but active minutes, that suggest that for older adults, they accumulate at least 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous, intense aerobic physical activity per week. This comes from Public Health Agency of Canada, that's their language, in bouts of 10 minutes or more. So you have to plan that into your life, and the tracker certainly helps. 150 minutes per week doesn't sound like too much, but it's still a standard set by public health. And along with daily steps, many trackers mention heart rate as indicators of activity effort and overall other health standards. Our interest in these devices and their data is not that they don't help or encourage or inspire you to be active, but it's how they're linked to the biomedical calculation of present and future health risks in relation to aging and the consequences of the users who are guided by them. What happens to you when this data starts to matter? How do you define yourself through it? How does it reflect your health back to you? One industry analyst makes it clear. She says using a Fitbit or similar device makes monitoring one's health part of your lifestyle. It becomes part of your lifestyle. And as such, wearable tracking technologies can really symbolize the division between active and inactive seniors, between the risk aversive and the risk prone, between the responsible and the irresponsible, between those who want to manage their health and those who don't manage their health, and on and on. There is a kind of moral divide that symbolically takes individual lifestyle regimes and turns them into moral hierarchies of difference. And that's a very convenient route for downloading social or economic problems to individual agency. Why you may or may not be active or healthy or even able to afford a Fitbit or all of the prescription subscription costs that go with uploading data may have nothing to do with you or what you expect. It may have everything to do with your economic status or who you live with, the social determinants of health. If you live in a horribly cheap rooming house where ice is not shoveled, that's unsafe, where lighting is terrible in your hallway, where your bathrooms and your hallways are slippery, and yet expected to walk 150 minutes a week with a Fitbit at certain paces is pretty unfair. In other words, a lot of this language and a lot of the imagery, as you can see in some of these pictures, marginalize the real economic conditions by which many seniors live, and the many ways in which their health is determined by other things: environment, genetics, abuse, violence, trauma, overwork, unsafe, toxic conditions by which they've spent their lifetime working, lack of retirement income, so much more that social determinants of health have already shown us have nothing to do with individual agency. So lifestyle itself, and this word is repeated as a mantra when it comes to older health, is filled with activities that often marginalize the social determinants of health. Lifestyle is filled with activities to optimize your personal resources to avoid dependency. Or if you are not living a successful lifestyle, of course, lifestyle is used to denigrate your lack of such activities and that you need help by often buying more consumer products to boost your lifestyles, right? To boost your lifestyle resourcefulness. So Fitbits, again, can be wonderful inspirations for all of us to walk more and track more. But as sociologists, we also like to point out that there's social products with social meaning and symbolic dimensions to them, and tie into already social divisions and inequalities that exist amongst our older citizens. Let me move on to my next example, which is your brain and our brains and memory. Added to physical health and even sexual health is the idea of cognitive health. One of the results of the technological turn is more and more layers and types of health are being added to our responsibilities. We're not just responsible for our physical health anymore, or our sexual health, which is a relatively new one, but now also our cognitive health status. And cognitive health is thrown around as a word that I know has meaning in the scientific community, but sometimes nobody actually knows what it means otherwise. Cognitive health status, in fact, has been coupled to the other statuses. Doesn't do much good if you have physical health, but lack cognitive health. And the attention to brain care today is growing and large, especially in lifestyle media that acts to educate readers constantly about brain boosting foods, brain boosting vitamins, brain boosting exercises, and optimizing mental workouts, as they're called. There's also brain gyms. I don't know if any of you are a member of a brain gym where they give you a brain trainer and various games and exercises and test you from time to time, showing them the metonymic relationship between muscles and brains, as that image there with the brain lifting weights really demonstrates. The brain is a kind of muscle. According to this sort of imagery, the more you use it, the more, or the less you use it, the more you lose it. Even the Alzheimer's Society of Canada advises people, and I quote, to keep your brain active every day. That's good advice. Who knows how to do that? Who knows what that means? What if you decided you didn't want your brain to be active one day? What would you do? Just say, you know what, the hell with it. My brain is tired today. I don't want to have brain activity today. I'm just going to turn it off. I'm going into bed. I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to have an inactive brain day. We couldn't do that. We can't just make our brains active and inactive. It's not that way. Alzheimer's Society of Canada also says, I quote, a healthy brain can withstand illness better. But how do we really know whether our brains are healthy or active, let alone try and keep them that way? Well, perhaps this is not new. There's a long history of mind training that predates modern science. We have all kinds of stories of memory games and exercises going way back to Aristotle. But what is new, or at least modern, according to Ian Hacking, who worked at the University of Toronto, might have known him, is the emergence of what he calls memoral or cognito politics. That is a kind of politics of mind that became extended to the military, to studies of crime, and other administrative practices invested in the regulation of human minds and the governance of population risk. It's not just about the brain, it's the governance of mind, he says, that has to be understood as the background to our brain studies. And today, I think this kind of cognitopolitics has been invested in the future of our aging population. In the American National Institutes of Health report, the NIH, it's claimed they spent nearly 20% of their total budget on brain-related projects. We know that when George W. Bush was president, it was declared the decade of the brain, which of course was a bit of an oxymoron given he was president, but the idea that you could have a decade of the brain. was interesting. American companies like Humana and MetLife, giant health companies, have programs to encourage clients to optimize their brain health. It's part of their promotion packages. And such politics also underpins what Stephen Post has called a hypercognitive society, where public expectations for cognitive performance have really expanded. And there's a book there too called Mental Capital, the idea of boosting mental capital. That's the British Foresight Report. And many other reports and promotions are promoting this idea that cognitive health really is a kind of social project for older people related to their success. And the evidence of a kind of coalescence between the brain sciences and social politics is seen through the ways in which brain discourses are used to explain human behavior and create what Fernando Vidal, who's an anthropologist of the brain, calls cerebral subjects. We've kind of become cerebral subjects who learn to express our identity in neuroscientific ways, in neuroscientific terms. Now, do we really know the relationship between health and brains and optimization and improvement and active brains and healthy brains? I don't know how we can know this as ordinary people. Such terms yet are ubiquitous in our public discourses, in our languages. They sound right. They appear to appeal to us, but we're not quite. What does optimization really mean? What does enhancement really mean? What's the difference between the two? It's pretty hard to absolutely know for ourselves. Finally, there is this term brain plasticity that's thrown around as well. And that is a very interesting term, but it's also a very poorly understood concept that the brain can change itself, which on a synaptic level makes sense. But inflated to a cultural project, a social project, plasticity becomes a measure of successful aging through an individual's activities, that the brain is assumed to change itself and human character also. It turns us into more flexible, mobile, and adaptable people. That's the image. Even though these traits of plasticity also articulate neoliberal and global capitalist strategies. You think of the language used to describe new labor markets and the language used to describe people, and plasticity kind of joins the two together. Be ever ready, ever adaptable, ever mobile, ready to change, and flexibility is the key to successful life. That's exactly how labor is talked about too today. So we have this kind of new series of concepts and discourses and images that I think are really interesting that constitute what's been called a neuroculture itself. This is a profitable culture, just like FitBits, just like the Amazon buying up of patents and health patents, lots and lots of capitalization here. The images and discourses of neuroculture boost the profitability as its markets are spreading. There's marketing cognitive advice. There's the brain gyms and foods, as I talked about. There's new products. There's brain boosting programs. Companies like Happy Neuron that promises you brain fitness for life. The forecast is about a $6 billion market in 2020 of just these games and exercises, 6 billion. So it's no surprise that online brain game performances, or what has been referred to as bio games, fits well within this market. Just like physical fitness has become a booming industry, brain and cognitive fitness have become a booming industry. For example, Vibrant Bee, another company, is promoted as a health club for your brain. And this language here you could see where the sweat is figurative, but the results are real. Sounds like a gym, sounds like a physical gym, the health club for your brain. On the other slide, on the other picture, just as exercise can build muscle, again, the metaphor is your brain is a muscle. The more you work at it, the healthier it's going to be. Uniting these products and games is part of that use it or lose it mantra, by which our minds are always talked about. If you don't use it, you will lose it, implying that aging is always cognitive decline. And if you don't use your brains, you are going to enter that particular vortex of cognitive decline unless you do something about it. I think this is an incredible construction, a punitive construction too, that you will decline unless you do something. And that something hopefully will involve buying some of these products and thinking of your brain in this way and aspiring to new values of optimization, enhancement, cognitive fitness, even though you have no idea, I don't have any idea anyway, what exactly those terms mean. In reality, even if brain games and products are fun, and I'm not saying they're not, if those of you engage in them, they could be a lot of fun. They could produce some social engagement with other brain gamers. You could form friendships, and I think that's wonderful. But they do not necessarily enhance cognitive fitness or brain plasticity. Researchers have shown there's very little connection between these games and what they promise. Some companies are being sued, actually, for promising way more than they ever could deliver. Furthermore, the brain training online ecologies not only isolate the brain from the rest of your life, from the rest of your body, but they also individualize it apart, again, from the social determinants of real cognitive health. What are the social determinants of brain health? Nutrition, your environment, toxic air, toxic or clean water. It's very clear in Flint, Michigan, that when they discovered lead in the water, there were definite cognitive problems of the population who had been living on leadened water. That had way more to do than whether they played brain games or not. It was drinking poisonous water. Peter Whitehouse has said that testing a brain fitness video game or a computer game is also much cheaper and easier than testing a social intervention, a social problem. In fact, game benefits are exaggerated. It was Luminosity, if you've heard of the company Luminosity, that was fined $2 million in the United States because it misled consumers about its program's positive benefits. Luminosity said it couldn't pay that fine, by the way, so the court said they could pay less. Wouldn't that be great for any of us? Oh, I'm sorry, we can't pay our ticket. That's okay, pay what you have, a toonie, no problem, just that'll do. But cognitive fitness benefits, of course, seem true, partly because they're embedded in the kinds of images we see on the slide, a kind of image rhetoric in the internet architecture that has scorekeeping, shared profiles, testimonials by experts, program coaching, user self-tracking. It's almost like the rhetoric of the image gives us a very, very appealing opportunity to work on our cognitive fitness, even if we're not optimizing our brains or improving them at all. The image and the exercises make it appear so. And we could enjoy that. We could enjoy, as the slide says, tracking our progress so far. That could be fun. And the other slide, welcome, Aaron. They know your names. They have experts who chime in. They have a chat line. It really is, I think, very exciting. But what does it do? What does it actually do? So in a wider sense, the connection between brain politics and brain performance lies within our public anxieties, let's face it, about dementia. Dementia as a real dire consequence for growing aging populations. Dementia is constantly represented by the negative, the dark images that we see here. Lost minds, lost souls, endless nightmares, lost selves. I mean, the public imagery around dementia is not about optimization or enhancement or even life itself. So aging individuals who choose not to buy into the promise of brain work and preventative lifestyles can eventually become stigmatized as vulnerable to dementia, vulnerable to decline, an entry in what's been called the fourth age. The fourth age, that is a black hole, as Chris Gilliard and Paul Higgs call it, where you lose agency, you lose control, a completely dependent lifestyle, a sedentary lifestyle. In fact, I have a chapter in a recent book, I don't know if you could see this or not, on the new politics of prevention and dementia and lifestyle. It just came out. It's called Preventing Dementia. It's a really interesting collection about exactly what I'm talking about here, how the black hole of fourth age dementia is like when the Wizard of Oz pulls the curtain back, that's who's there, you know? So I've talked for about 50 minutes or so, hence time is up. I have to end with a little picture of my beautiful campus at Trent University. The outside looks always very beautiful. Inside is a different situation, but we love our outside, and it really is a very beautiful campus. So thanks a lot for your patience. I know you've sat there listening to this for a while. I hope some of these ideas inspire some conversation or questions or thoughts of your own, which I'm very excited to hear. And so I'll turn it over to Michael to take the next part of the scheduling here.